For Sunday, January 18th, you've found the Georgia Gang. Topping our agenda today, this is the week the sun shines on Georgia's governor. NCR makes a reverse move back into the city of Atlanta, and the legislature will be weighing the transportation tax hikes. Some of the stories up for grabs on the Georgia Gang.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
And we're glad you could be with us on this Sunday. This particular week, when the General Assembly goes back into session, the spotlight is always on the governor. And in fact, Governor Nathan Deal this week gave 3 major policy addresses. And we were awaiting on Friday his full budget proposal. But Phil, I turn to you. Obviously now we have the Speaker of the House, David Ralston, the Lieutenant Governor, Casey Cagle, and Governor Nathan Deal, all in agreement that transportation and transit are the big deal we've got to do something about, but nobody's saying, how do we pay for it?
Well, that's right. You heard, for example, the State of the State address by Governor Deal. Unfortunately, as we tape, we don't have the numbers, but we do know the priorities. And yes, $1 billion is what needs to be addressed in roads and infrastructure.
$1 billion a year is what they're talking about.
That's correct, and yet he's leaving it to the legislature to figure it out. So that's going to be, and then of course the other priority was education, which we can talk about.
Well, the transportation thing, I guess in the absence of a specific proposal, we don't have to beat it to death here, but the legislators I've talked to are saying no to a sales tax. They will all go with the 4th penny of the gas tax. Mm-hmm. And then Ed Setzler, for example, of Ackworth, has a bill that it confuses me a little bit, but it would raise the excise tax on gas in return for lowering their income tax. There are a lot of proposals out there.
Right.
I just wonder if the Governor Deal's style is to let the legislature legislate. He's not like Sonny Perdue or Roy Barnes before him.
Right.
So I wonder, though, if
I don't know.
We're going to need a little bit more than that. We're going to need some executive leadership, particularly on this issue, because we've done so little for so long. As the governor pointed out, haven't raised the gas tax in 44 years in the state of Georgia. That's exactly what he said in his speech, and that's a long, long time to have this outmoded tax, especially considering the fact that efficiency of cars has doubled over that period, so you're not collecting nearly as much as you would have been otherwise.
And not to mention the fact that the price of gas has gone down.
He also said that we're on a 50-year cycle for resurfacing roads in the state of Georgia. So if you are at age 15 and the road on your street is recycled, it won't be recycled, as he said, until you're on Social Security. This is crazy.
No, until you have new cities. When you have new cities, your streets get paved.
Well, because when you have new cities, you have new taxes.
No, no, you don't.
Yeah, you do.
Not necessarily.
They're lower than that.
Yeah, you do. You have new taxes.
I tell you,
here's what the governor said. The governor said we're on a 50-year cycle for recycling. He didn't say anything about new cities. I mean, for resurfacing. Didn't say anything about new cities. But I think that was him talking to the legislature and the business community and saying, we've got to put some money into this. We've got to fund it.
I don't disagree.
Well, everyone agrees with that, Jeff, but as you know, and I've had a lot of legislators come up to me saying, boy, some of the leaders want to do what you're talking about, but my constituents are telling me just what you said, Alexis, gas prices are down. I don't want to pay any more. We're finally
That's why I think it's really going to take some leadership.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. One thing that was interesting was his plans for education. The governor proposed a separate school system, a state school system for failing schools. Recovery districts, I believe they're called in Louisiana.
That's right. And basically the state would take over a failing school. And it's been working well, as you say, in Louisiana.
Yeah, he says it's been working well, but he cited one anecdote talking to one student, and I don't know if that proves the point. But I don't know. I do agree that there needs to be an overhaul in the way teaching is done, especially with all the technology that's available, 21st century. You don't need to have people, all sitting together in a classroom with doing one thing at one time. I think there's a lot.
You're right, but you do have to address failing schools. I mean, look no further than some of our metro counties that we've talked about, and that's what the governor's trying to do. In fact, Jeff, you pointed out DeKalb County turned around with a new school board.
Absolutely. I mean, No Child Left Behind was an attempt to get at failing schools. We all want to get at failing schools. The question is, how much
What's
do you,
the best way to do it?
what distance do we go from the schoolhouse to the government? And we're going farther if we get, if the state starts taking over from that actual schoolhouse, from that classroom to a government agency running that classroom and that school.
But it worked in DeKalb
I think that that's
County.
a heck of a leap.
It worked in DeKalb County.
It worked in DeKalb County because you
The
had
school
a
board
law
was
that
local.
said exactly right, and you had a school board that was local. You had a new superintendent come in, complete leadership shift in DeKalb County.
Now, one of the prices for all this, with the governor's proposal for this sort of recovery school districts, and I think the mechanics of that are going to be very tricky because, for example, do you separate out failing schools in Atlanta like we've been seeing in the cheating trial? Do you separate out failing schools in DeKalb and Clayton?
Right.
The logistics of that are pretty tricky, but one of the things the governor has done is put off for a year reform of the education school funding plan, QBE as we knew it back in the 80s, and he's put that off for another year.
Well,
That surprised me.
a commission is going to go forward. That's another tricky area with dealing
Yeah,
with funding
that's been
formulas
in
for
litigation
school systems.
for years,
That's
right.
right. You know, he's a very cautious person. I think that's an area where you do need some caution.
And he wants to rename the technical schools, the technical colleges, the career colleges, and he wants to set up a Georgia Film Academy. I think that makes sense given the number of jobs that are coming in.
Well, that's great, and of course the legislature did that tax credit a couple of years ago where the film industry is just exploding in the state.
Speaking of tax credits, we didn't mention this the week before, but Georgia Goal Scholarships, GOAL, those scholarships go to low-income kids to allow them to go to private schools. And the program was set up to pay out $58 million in scholarships. That money was gone
On the first day,
the
right?
very first day of this new year.
Well, let's make this clear. This is a tax credit that you can claim on your income taxes. It's a credit. It's not a deduction.
Right.
It's a dollar-for-dollar reduction in your tax liability. And it's $2,500 for married couples. And it is up to 75% of your tax liability for corporations. I think it's fine for individuals and families. For corporations, it's just a tax dodge.
You
Well,
are going to
it's a-
lose a lot of revenue
It's a
with that.
tax dodge with an important point. You take children out of these failing schools, and children
We
from
need-
bad
we
family
need for- we
situations,
need
I
for-
would
and you
certainly
put them
like
in
to
great
see
private
I would like to
schools.
see the report of what children are actually taking advantage of these scholarships. I'm not convinced that it's actually poor children. And beyond that, just paying the tuition is only the start. If you're a poor, from a low-income family, there are books, there are trips, there are all sorts of added expenses that go along with attending these fancy private schools.
And the fact is, I mean, you're a corporate
they're
citizen in
not
the
all
state of Georgia.
fancy.
You got a lot of things that you need to pay for. You need to pay for roads. You need to pay for a lot of things, not just education. You should not be able to take 75% of your tax liability and apply it to education.
All right, the governor's other priority was, again, his criminal justice reform. He wants a new agency to oversee probation and parole. And
This is a very bold, visionary move. If I could just take a
I'm
second.
glad you know something about it because I don't.
Yeah, I tell you, used to write editorials in the 1980s asking for this very thing, along with other editorial
In the
pages.
1980s, well, you're old.
I know it. I was a young editorial writer, Jeffrey, just like you.
Teenage
But I tell
editorial
you, what this does is it finally gets this red-haired stepchild probation and parole out of corrections. It's streamlined. This is going to save tons of taxpayer money. It also, I'm glad that juvenile justice has moved into this new probation and parole system. The juveniles, sad to say, 75% of them end up in the adult system. This will try to help.
It
keep
streamlines.
this-
I think that it makes a lot of sense.
It
And also,
does.
there's also an attachment to the Family Services Department, and so
It should have been
makes
done
sense.
25 years ago. It's great.
Well, let's hope it will make a difference. You know, one of the things that I fear, I remember back in the old days when we were all at the AJC, except for you, Phil, when they decided to combine the staffs of the Journal and the Constitution newsrooms. Precursor to that was the new Metro desk, where we would have a joint reporter going out to cover the tornado in Cobb County. And instead of having 2 reporters, we now had 3 reporters because nobody wanted to give up their turf.
Well, of course.
So we'll see how that works with this streamlining.
I still deny there's something called the Atlanta Constitution. There's no morning newspaper in Atlanta, right? All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about medical marijuana. It's a little bit tricky how they're going to try to handle that. And one state representative is adopting the Dick Williams plan. I'll tell you about it in just a minute.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at myfoxatlanta.com.
With the General Assembly having completed what is essentially a ceremonial first week in action, we don't really know what the true flashpoints will be. We just looked at it from the perspective of the governor and what he wants to do from his State of the State address. But legislatures themselves have individual plans. One of the ones being discussed ad nauseum, frankly, is medical marijuana or marijuana oil, cannabis oil. And I can't follow all the machinations, but Representative Alan Peake of Macon apparently has given up on the idea of allowing people to bring it back from Colorado.
Well,
because they'd be violating federal law?
That's right, and then there's also, he tweaked the bill to make it a little more palatable, according to Representative Peake. And there also was the fact that you can't be growing this plants
Right.
for the oil
For it
here.
yourself, yeah.
So those are the two tweaks. He feels that that's going to streamline passage. The governor was happy with it. So we'll see what
The
happens.
governor wants to see it happen, some sort of medical marijuana bill, only for medicinal purposes, of course. He said that we want Georgia citizens to come back from Colorado without becoming Colorado.
Yeah, that was a pretty good line.
It's a good line, but it shows that, you know, as usual, Georgia's about 20 years behind the curve.
Exactly.
In 20 years,
And plus-
we'll be where Colorado.
Right,
Colorado.
exactly.
You're in favor of full legalization.
I am.
Oh my God,
I
and
am.
taxing it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes, and
absolutely.
taxing
And getting
it,
some revenue
absolutely.
so that we can build our roads and bridges.
And keep people out of jail.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I
And
dodge enough drunks on the roads. I don't want to dodge stoners, too.
let me tell you what. You only have to dodge. You only have to dodge the boozers.
And I think
Right.
there's some buyer's remorse in Colorado with all of this,
I think
too.
there is, too.
It's
Now,
only because they didn't get in on the boom. People are making money out there.
State Representative Mike Dudgeon, I've met him a couple of times. He's from North Fulton. And he has dropped a bill. I don't think it'll go anywhere. But it is to make the school superintendent's job appointed rather than elected. Now, I've been advocating for that, Jeffrey, going back to our days as editorial writer, so I guess 30 years.
Absolutely.
A whole bunch of these statewide
perfectly good
elected
sense.
offices should be appointed
Appointed.
rather than
Yes,
elected. If the
yes.
governor's highest priority is education, shouldn't the governor be able to appoint the state school
And then
superintendent?
when we look at the quality of some of the people who've been in that office recently, dating back to the one who went to prison, I can't remember
woman,
her name.
Shrinko.
Linda
Linda
Shrinko.
Shrinko. Yeah, it should be an appointed position. It should be where you put a committee together and you find somebody who is at the top of their game in education, and that's the state school superintendent, not somebody who happens to go out there and get the votes. I doubt that you
Yeah,
can
and
find
this is no
100
reflection on the
Georgians
current-
who can name the current school
Well,
superintendent.
and my point is no reflection on the current new school superintendent, Richard Woods. He hadn't been there but a week or so.
Right.
So I don't think, we're not reflecting
Well,
on him when I say that.
But also, reporting shows, and which I didn't really know how it all worked until I read the story that was in the AJC last week, that he really doesn't have any power. The state school superintendent, the legislature does the budget, the school board does the policy, and he oversees the
You're
Department
right, it's just
of
day to day.
Education.
There's very little power. I'm not opposed to these executive officers under a governor doing this. I will say this, and polling shows this too, though. The people are very reticent to give up an elected position. Maybe under the Williams
It's always
plan,
been
you
the
might
case.
want to tweak that and say maybe we should be electing state school board representatives by, say, congressional districts or some plan where if you take away the elected school superintendent, you're at least giving the people some control over their elected school board, which, as you point out, they are the real power.
And they are appointed.
And they are appointed.
That's right.
All right, let's turn to local news. I didn't see this one coming. NCR, the old National Cash Register Corporation, which had moved here to some ballyhoo from Dayton, Ohio, about 5 years ago, moved to Gwinnett County, and then this week announced that NCR would be moving to Midtown to sort of adjoin the Georgia Tech campus and get after the millennials and the young talent that they need. I was just really surprised when they were in Dayton looking at Metro Atlanta. Now, Dayton, of course, for all of us who have ever worked for the Atlanta newspapers, Dayton can be a dirty word. But didn't they think maybe they'd like to be closer to Georgia Tech and Emory and instead of in Gwinnett County?
I think that when that happened, you know, the suburbs were the place to be. We saw that a lot. We saw another company just move from Sandy Springs, or announced that it was moving from Sandy Springs to the city of Atlanta to Midtown. And you're going to see it time and time again. And the reason is very simple. Millennials are saying that they're not going to the suburbs for jobs. Just that simple. They're not going to do the commute. Their lifestyle pattern is different from their parents.
Yeah, they don't even have driver's licenses.
Many of them don't have driver's licenses. They're staying in the city. They want to bike on the Beltline to their jobs. That's the new pattern.
And you see this in other cities like Sandy Springs and like
Yes.
Alpharetta.
And the
They wanna
fact of the
develop
matter
core.
is that corporate America is kind of catching on. Perfect example with NCR, 2,000 jobs or more coming to the city of Atlanta. Certegy, I think it is, right down on Tech's campus. And we're going to see this time and time again. And that's why I say the Braves made the wrong decision at the wrong time because they're going in the wrong direction.
Well,
Well, I will say that. Let me just a footnote though to my liberal friends. Whether we're talking about NCR or Mercedes-Benz, which went to Sandy Springs, they all cite Georgia's low taxes. So be careful, you tax hikers.
Now,
What you ask for?
one thing about Braves fans, they do have driver's licenses.
Yes, and they
And
do drive
and the
their
fan
cars.
base is in Cobb County and northward.
Those who were 16.
I want to
Right.
see these NCR millennials without driver's licenses. What happens if they get carded? Come
They
on.
have a state ID. They don't
Yeah,
care about
yeah,
the driver's license. You can get an ID otherwise.
That's exactly
That's right. You can.
Yeah, you
You
don't
can even get a photo ID.
Exactly.
For free.
There's nothing stopping anybody.
And you have to have a
from
driver's license to
presenting
ride
that ID.
a scooter in the state of Georgia as well.
Alexis walked right into it.
She
No,
did.
I
The
got
trap,
your
the trap
reference.
snapped shut. Yes.
Well, let's get everybody a state ID. Let's do that.
All right, when we come back, we've got news about that second airport with commercial service in Paulding County. Stay with us.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at myfoxatlanta.com.
An interesting story from Paulding County on the west side of Metro Atlanta. That county commission voted 3-2 this past week not to authorize commercial air service at their local airport. This has been going on for about a year. What I find interesting is that the airport authority, a separate body, says, hey, we decide that. So does the county commission decision have meaning?
I don't think it does. I've always been, as you know, a big fan of a second commercial airport, a smaller commercial airport. Every major city in America has one except for this one. The commission vote, I think, is meaningless. It's a contract with a private company through, as you point out, the Aviation Commission. There was a political flip on the commission in the elections last year, and that's what caused the
Yeah, it went
3-2
from
vote.
3-2 to 3-2 on
That's
the
right.
other side.
There is a contract that may be breached here. This was a resolution. It doesn't have any, it's not, there's no binding, there's no force to it.
No, but it does show the sentiment of the community. So it'll be.
I think the
interesting to see
community's
how-
torn,
how
split
the
right down the middle. I
authority
think it's a
responds to
split.
it.
Well,
right
there
down
might
the
be, but they did elect 2 new commissioners, and that's how this vote came to be.
And the
3-2.
charge was that Delta was funding those campaigns.
And those 2 are against the airport.
Now, next door to
expansion.
Paulding County in Cobb County, Tim Freeman, the county commission chairman, seems to attract reporters.
Tim Lee?
What did I say?
Tim Lee,
Freeman.
yeah.
No, you said Tim Freeman.
Who's Tim Freeman?
I don't know.
Anyway, Tim Lee, the county commission chairman, that's terrible. He got himself in a little bit of a jackpot that I think should have so easily been avoided. His wife works for a nonprofit called Must Ministries, and there was going to be county funds given to Must Ministries to take care of the homeless or pay rent for the
rent,
poor.
subsidize.
That sort of thing, some do-good deal. And if your wife works for it, why would you go there?
Well, you should recuse yourself, obviously. And then Commissioner Lisa Cupid made a good point. You know, were there other bids solicited? And then all of a sudden there was some hemming and hawing and saying, well, gee, no, I don't think there were. So, you know, Tim Lee, we criticized him last week for lack of transparency over the Braves deal, and we've criticized him for putting in this media person since he can't seem to speak to the media himself.
Right. Well, then they did the do-over. He recused himself. They voted and gave him the money. They
Okay.
gave him $5,000.
All right, well, it's not a lot of money. It's just that I keep wondering why Tim Lee gets in these jackpots all the time.
I think there's some blind spots there.
Okay, all right. Now, interesting doings at the state capitol this week in another sense. You have the fire chief of the city of Atlanta, Kelvin Cochran, being sort of hailed at a rally at the state capitol, not at City Hall, at the state capitol, I guess, to promote this religious liberties bill that's going to come up in this session of the General Assembly. But isn't it ironic that here's a protest rally in the state capitol for a black guy on the 50th anniversary of Julian Bond's failure to be seated in the State House, and the Voting Rights Act and all the rest of it. And at a time we had a governor, and I just read this week, I don't remember this, that the governor had the state police keep the funeral wagon of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. off
those
state.
Lester Maddox.
That governor was Lester Maddox, yeah.
Well, let's go back. It's an interesting history lesson, but let's go back to today and what's happening with this.
Well, you don't like history.
Well, it's great, but let's talk about let's talk about the religious liberty bill. Let's talk about the religious liberty bill. It may be painful for you.
No, it's painful for you.
And I know you worship at the altar of Kasim Reed, but I'm going to stand up for the ousted fire chief Kelvin Cochran. He's a devoted Christian, and I was upset to see after that rally that the mayor lashed out and called him a liar.
His religion has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not he gets to keep his job, whether or not he has. And
he's
the
got a
other
great
thing
lawsuit there. For
here's the real irony: is you got people over there pushing a religious liberty bill, the so-called religious liberty bill, and they've got as their speaker a guy who got fired from his job for violating his personnel agreement.
Well, you got the mayor's talking points down straight.
No. It's just that's exactly what happened.
You'll never criticize the mayor. We know that.
And beyond that, it was not about religion. It was about politics, and it was about him being.
He said the mayor had his copy of his book, and he got permission. Now, who's lying, the mayor or this good?
The mayor said
I bet it never got to the mayor, to tell you the truth.
Well, we don't know that.
Wait a minute. First of all, he was suspended before he was fired because he had violated the personnel rules. Phil, it's just that simple.
I understand the suspension. He could have been reinstated, though, Jeff.
But the mayor said that during his suspension, he further exacerbated the situation by speaking out against.
He has a right to his Christian beliefs.
The fact of the matter is that the people in the General Assembly,
the mayor has a right to hire who he wants to hire in his cabinet.
The folks in the General Assembly pushing this religious liberty bill were not at the rally, and they weren't at the rally because they understand that Cochran's situation doesn't apply to their bill.
Actually, I thought it was a smart move that they weren't there. In fact, there was probably a majority of African Americans there, led by a lot of their clergymen from their houses of worship. This is not a liberal conservative thing. This is about religious discrimination. I think Mayor Reed has ended any statewide aspirations that if he ever harbored.
Well, I kind of side with the mayor to this extent. We've got to get out. Kelvin Cochran wasn't fired for his beliefs. Right. He was fired for his judgment.
Right.
And how he promulgated and pushed those.
He could have been suspended and then reinstated if we go with your
Well, that's
view.
true, but then he gave some press interviews that made the mayor angry. And we know when the mayor gets angry.
Well,
that's it for you.
I think the mayor handled it all wrong.
Well, he could, but he was within his rights to do it because
I agree with Dick and the New York Times editorial that said exactly
all right,
the same
I just changed
thing.
my position. When we come back, winners and losers.
Time now for this week's Winners and Losers.
And we're going to have to speak quickly. Jeffrey, what do you have?
Well, first of all, Governor Deal, I think he had a great week. He's going to be the winner. The statue of Martin Luther King Jr. on the Capitol grounds. You're talking about irony and Lester Maddox not allowing the wheel-covered
That's a good point.
wagon. I mean, that's the great irony 50 years later. So hats off to him. His leadership, I think, on transportation and education. Strong speech. He's off to a great 2015. The AJC has done a poll, and so I'd like to congratulate Georgians for supporting Obama's immigration policies, Phil, to the tune of 67% across all races, all ideologies. There were majorities in support of that. And finally, 400,000 Georgians already have signed up for Obamacare during this cycle. And by mid-February, we're expecting up to 500,000 or 5% of the state population. That's great news.
Good.
Well, the
Philip.
loser is that AJC poll from that liberal polling agency. But I will say that I agree with you on the governor and Liberty Plaza, which was dedicated. That's a great thing across from the
Yes,
Capitol.
absolutely.
My loser is Kennesaw State University. That student group inviting the communist, violent revolutionary Angela Davis to celebrate Martin Luther King Day, and Martin Luther King was a nonviolent person. It just didn't make any sense.
All right, Alexis, quickly.
Okay, I'll disagree with Phil on that, but I also want to congratulate Sheffield Hale. He came up with the idea at the Atlanta History Center to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Atlanta's celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Nobel Peace Prize. So on January 27th, they're going to have people who were there at a panel and program open to the public, so people should check that out. Also, the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, they had their 9th annual media briefing on the top 10 issues
We
for
gotta
education.
get out.
Okay, so
All right, well, that's
congratulations.
good. Hold up the book. All right,
All right.
I'm just going to say this. I don't know what the Braves are doing. Now we've traded Evan Gattis. Who's going to get the runners from first base to second base to third base? I don't get any of this. We'll see you next week on the Georgia Gang.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing on today's program.